Game interactivity for me is how interactable a game's gameplay is, or can be for the player. What kind of options it gives them in gameplay, and be engaged in and have fun with the gameplay's potential. I'm gonna use the Devil May Cry series as an example to make a point. They're known for the fantastic combat. If someone played a DMC game, stinger spamming without doing anything else, or something similar and then says the combat sucks and easy, how could we agree with that? No offense of course to anyone that has played it that way, you can play games in any way that you want to. The point I'm trying to make is, depending on how you approach the game, what the player wants from the game, the experience will differ. If the player does only that, they won't explore the interactivity so much for themselves. If you start experimenting though, you start seeing the potential of it. Can games be blamed for this? For not teaching the player or maybe even forcing them to change it up? Subjectively for me, it's in between. If the game gives options to the player, it is up to them if they want to use it. Another thing is how and when the gameplay itself starts to open up. I'll use a controversial example, Metal Gear Solid 5. A lot of people have said it's all about stabbing zombies with a spear through a fence, and that's all you do. And while you're probably doing that in the beginning of the game, as you progress through, things change. The game gives you more options and adds different situations. The spear and fence option will be just another method you can use if you want to. I've seen reviewers kill this entire area of zombies with a spear and fence. My question is why? You probably thought to yourself, this is boring and repetitive. But the way this specific part of the area is designed, it gives you a stealth option. If you don't like stealth, you can attract all the zombies in one place and go around them. You can even do something like this. My entire point is, just because a game lets you play like this, should you? If you find it boring or easy, the game could give you other ways you could interact with it. There's also the difficulty aspect of games. Depending on what the difficulty is, the gameplay potential might lead to being discovered or need to be discovered. Some games have started simplifying things in some way. Some examples I can think of right now is Devil May Cry and Nier Automata. Devil May Cry has gold orbs, Nier Automata has healing items, and you can use them even on their harder difficulties. It will be up to the player if they want to use these. It's as if they're modifying their own challenge from the game. This can be applied to other aspects of the game of course. There might be some powerful weapon, a game breaking bug, OP spot in some level, or something similar in some game, and it will come down to whether players want to use that or not. This also comes down to difficulty. If a game is too easy, a player could handicap themselves in some way to make the game more interesting or challenging, or use a different playstyle. The funniest example that I can actually think of right now is Dead by Daylight. You see, the entire fucking game is just resolved around please don't use fucking OP stuff, or you're a dick. Now I'm just gonna give some random examples. I thought Dusk's gameplay was rather dull until I realized how I can use the slide more effectively. Found out that you can deflect the fireballs and how to weapon switch more efficiently. I don't have to do any of this. I don't have to approach the game like this at all. I can just corner peek and probably beat the game easily like that. Playing the game like this is more fun. It's a different approach, makes the game more unique, challenging, and also makes the game deeper for me. Recently I started playing Tales of Berseria. Combat is controversial. There's a lot of people that dislike it and find it button mash. I personally love it though. Velvet's power is pretty bonkers depending on how you use it. Right now I'm just button mashing. But if you approach the game differently, use any of the other characters, switch up the difficulty, learn how the mechanics and moves work, there's more strategy and the game's combat can open up. I could play Shadow Warrior like this. Or I could play it like this. Let's talk about tutorials. The lack of good tutorials for some games can hurt its interactivity Now, of course, I don't want the game to teach you everything. There's gameplay features that I do think the player should find or figure out by themselves. If the game points them in the right direction, then it's done a good job, right? I guess so. A random example is jump cancelling in Devil May Cry. The game introduces you to the mechanic, but it doesn't tell you the potential of it. That you can cancel attacks into other ones, or do something else. Newer players might never figure this out. Of course, there's also unintended gameplay mechanics that get found by players. Now, this isn't meant to be on the topic about tutorials that I'm talking about, but it's more like it can change the game how it plays drastically. Another thing I'd like to add is a game doesn't have to be necessarily deep to have an interesting gameplay potential. Serious Sam for me is like this. I love the game for the enemy, weapon, gameplay design because it creates interesting situations. The game isn't as deep as it could potentially be. Another decent example I could probably think of is Sekiro. And looking at the gameplay, it's probably not very deep, but I think the game still shines on its own with other elements, whether it be enemies, difficulty, enemy mix and levels, level design, gameplay mechanic, feel, and other. Let's also talk about issues in the game. That issue, whether it be a bug, gameplay design flaw, some oversight, downgrade from a previous game in some way, feel of the game, gameplay mechanic, level design, polish, enemies. This topic can be different between individuals. How the game feels can be really important to spell how deep a game could be. Devil May Cry 5 is a game that is very well received, but most veterans don't like it very much. And while I think they would agree the gameplay potential is still deep, it feels limiting in some areas. And just because of this, they might even put off the game. A selfish example for me is I personally dislike Portal, just because the movement is so slow.
What exploded?
Another thing to note is there's a difference between adapting and having an issue with something. Adapting is when you're still learning the game. Even if there's a mechanic that you don't like, you might overcome it or like it in the future, because of new information, knowledge, or increased skill. When you've learned the game though, spend some time with it, have enough experience within the genre or anything similar, then we could say there's some common ground and the issue could be considered legitimate. Anyway, some of these issues or nags might not even be discovered until the game is replayed. If only one playthrough is done and the player found it really enjoyable for them, the game might always remain awesome or epic. Or the opposite. Of course, I'm not saying that you should go replay games that you've played to get the most full opinion on them. I'm saying that replaying or even coming back to a game can open up different opinions in the future. Or discussing it. However, I gotta mention there is some middle ground here. I'm stumped on how exactly to explain this, but let's just say there's usually some sort of a hive mind that might say something. I don't want to sound opinionated, but they're objectively wrong. It could be anything. I don't mean they're just expressing their own opinion. There's a difference between an opinion on something and something objective. I can't give you a good example because it just comes down to personal experience. If you tell me Metal Gear Survive's gameplay sucks, you're wrong. You can't convince me otherwise. If you instead tell me why you personally don't like it, however, that's fine. It has some issues, don't get me wrong, but the gameplay is good. This sort of thing could come down to mechanics of the game. Maybe the entire community of some game thinks some sort of a mechanic is overpowered, but there's actually some kind of play. Now let's briefly talk about reviews and ratings. Another point of view on games is just accepting the game for what it is. Why should some issues matter? Or maybe even the gameplay potential. The game is what it is and that's it. This point of view can be applied when viewing a game score like this. Any well-received game that you don't like for whatever reason, the game is probably fantastic when viewed from this point of view. Or the opposite. I just personally don't know whether it's fair for games to be rated like this or not. As an example, looking at Telltale games, they're generally well received by the public and scored well. For what they are, they're just fun stories that keep the players intrigued. There are games with deeper gameplay that score way less in comparison. I'm not trying to bash on Telltale games here, just making a comparison. I do think they deserve their score. I guess it could be just chalked up to different genres. Also, if there's some sort of controversy going on, the final score can be affected. Some games can get lower ratings just because of their own difficulties. Or harsher starts. Don't even get me started on reviewers that play the game for only 5 or 6 hours, maybe decide to get footage from somewhere else, put it on their own video or review, and then put a score down. Look, I don't mind those kind of reviews as long as you put a disclaimer. I'm not a big fan of single scores, because there's a lot of small things that can come into mind. Let's look at Devil May Cry 5. The game at the beginning had microtransactions controversy surrounding, but nobody talked about the weapons DLC, or at least not many people. As soon as it came out, the microtransactions did not affect the gameplay at all. If you bought the standard edition, you gotta buy the extra DLC weapons. There's no way you can grind them or unlock them. It might be considered a small thing, but for people that really love the game, it's considered a huge thing because it can change up their playstyle. Now, it's a small nitpick, but do you think it should affect the score in the end? Again, I gotta clarify, I love Devil May Cry 5, so I'm not bashing on it, I'm just talking about this topic on hand. In fact, I would love to see it win Game of the Year, despite its issues. For me, it's the Game of the Year. but it probably won't happen because there's a lot of hype factors and what it is playing into the game of the year. Anyway, I don't know where I'm really going with this video anymore. I'm just gonna end it here.